The letter arrived in Philadelphia on a bitter February morning in 1878, and when Eliza Bennett read that her brother Samuel had died alone in the Colorado mountains, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She held the paper with trembling fingers, the ink blurred in places where rain had touched it during its long journey east. The words were formal, written by a lawyer in Denver who explained that Samuel had passed during a winter storm, his body found by a trapper who checked on isolated cabins when the snows finally broke. But there was another letter folded inside, this one written in a different hand, stronger and more deliberate. It was from someone named Jacob Thornton, and it began with an apology. "Miss Bennett, I regret that I could not save your brother. I found him too late. He spoke of you in his final hours, said you were the only family he had left. He made me promise to write to you, to tell you he was sorry for leaving Philadelphia the way he did. Your brother was a good man, and I buried him proper on the mountain where he loved to watch the sunrise. If you ever find yourself out this way, I will take you to his resting place. Jacob Thornton." Eliza read the letter 3 times before she fully understood what she needed to do. She was 23 years old, unmarried, and working as a seamstress in a shop that barely paid enough to keep her in her boarding house room. Samuel had been her only brother, 7 years older, and when he left for Colorado Territory 5 years ago to seek his fortune, she had begged him to stay. But the call of the mountains had been too strong, and he had promised to send for her once he struck it rich. He never struck it rich. He never sent for her. And now he was gone. She used every penny she had saved to book passage on the first stage heading west. Her landlady thought she was mad. Her employer tried to convince her to stay. But Eliza had made up her mind. She needed to see where her brother had died. She needed to thank the man who had been with him at the end. She needed to say goodbye. The journey began on March 1st. The train took her as far as Kansas City, a loud and crowded trip that left her exhausted and overwhelmed. From there, she joined a wagon train heading toward Denver, a slower and more treacherous route that wound through territories she had only read about in newspapers. The other travelers were a mix of prospectors, families seeking new land, and drifters running from their pasts. Eliza kept to herself mostly, reading the few books she had brought and writing in her journal each night by firelight. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of grass that turned golden in the afternoon sun. She had never seen so much open space. In Philadelphia, buildings crowded together, streets narrow and filled with the sounds of commerce and industry. Here, the silence was vast and sometimes frightening. At night, coyotes howled in the distance, and the wind carried scents of sage and dust. 3 weeks into the journey, they crossed into Colorado Territory. The land began to change, rising gradually toward the distant mountains that appeared first as shadows on the horizon, then as massive peaks crowned with snow. Eliza felt her heart clench every time she looked at them. Samuel was somewhere up there, beneath the earth, never to see another sunrise. The wagon train encountered trouble near a settlement called Junction Creek. One of the wagons broke an axle, and they had to stop for repairs. Eliza used the delay to ask questions about the mountains, about how to reach the high country where her brother had lived. The answers were always the same. It was dangerous, especially for a woman alone. She would need a guide, someone who knew the trails. She would need supplies, horses, and luck. "Miss Bennett, you cannot be serious about going up there," said Mrs. Patterson, a stern-faced woman traveling with her husband and 4 children. "Those mountains are no place for a lady. There are bears and mountain lions. The trails are treacherous, and winter is barely over. You will freeze to death." "My brother is buried up there," Eliza replied quietly. "I have to go." Mrs. Patterson shook her head but said nothing more. They reached Denver in late April, 2 months after Eliza had left Philadelphia. The city was rough and bustling, filled with miners and merchants, saloons and supply stores. The streets were muddy from spring rains, and the air smelled of wood smoke and horses. Eliza found a modest hotel and took a room, then set about finding Jacob Thornton. The lawyer who had written the first letter gave her directions. Jacob Thornton lived in the mountains west of Denver, up near a place called Thornton Peak. It was a full day's ride to the base of the mountain, and then another day's climb to his cabin. The lawyer looked at her with skepticism when she said she intended to go. "Miss Bennett, Jacob Thornton is a mountain man. He lives alone, traps for furs, and comes down to town maybe twice a year. He is not accustomed to visitors, especially not ladies from the East. He wrote to me, Eliza said firmly. He said I could come see where my brother is buried. The lawyer sighed. I will draw you a map, but I strongly advise you to hire a guide. Eliza left his office with the map tucked into her bag. She spent the next week preparing. She bought practical clothing, sturdy boots, a split riding skirt, a warm coat, and a wide-brimmed hat. She purchased supplies, dried food, a bedroll, matches, a canteen. She bought a horse, a gentle mare named Rosie, and learned how to saddle her properly. The stable owner gave her lessons in basic horsemanship, shaking his head the entire time. You are a determined woman, Miss Bennett, he said. I will give you that. She set out on the 1st of May. The map showed a trail that followed a river valley into the mountains, then branched off toward Thornton Peak. The lawyer had marked the spot where Jacob's cabin supposedly stood. It looked impossibly far away. The first day was harder than she expected. Riding all day left her sore and exhausted. She made camp near the river, building a small fire and eating a cold supper of bread and cheese. The night sounds were different here than on the prairie. Water rushed over stones, and somewhere an owl hooted. She wrapped herself in her blanket and tried not to think about how alone she was. The second day, the trail began to climb. The trees grew thicker, pine and aspen crowding close to the path. The air smelled sharp and clean, and the temperature dropped as she gained elevation. Eliza's muscles ached, but she pressed on. She thought about Samuel, about the letters he had sent in the early years. He'd written about the beauty of the mountains, the sense of freedom, the wildness that called to something deep in his soul. She had never understood it until now. On the third day, she encountered her first real danger. A black bear crossed the trail ahead of her, massive and lumbering. Rosie snorted and backed up, and Eliza's heart hammered in her chest. She remembered the stable owner's advice: make noise, make yourself look big, do not run. She called out in a loud voice, and the bear paused, looked at her with small dark eyes, then ambled off into the trees. Eliza sat on her horse for a full 10 minutes, shaking before she could continue. The trail grew steeper. She passed abandoned mining claims, the skeletal remains of sluice boxes and broken tools. She saw deer grazing in meadows and heard the distant scream of an eagle. The mountains rose around her, massive and indifferent. She felt very small. On the 5th day, she reached the turnoff marked on her map. A narrow trail led higher toward Thornton Peak. She could see the summit now, still capped with snow despite the warming weather. Her hands were blistered from holding the reins, and her body ached in places she had not known could ache. But she was close. The trail wound through a forest of towering pines, then emerged into a clearing. And there, built against the side of the mountain, was a cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a small corral held 2 horses. Eliza's breath caught. She had made it. She dismounted carefully, her legs stiff and unsteady. As she approached the cabin, the door opened. A man stepped out, and Eliza stopped in her tracks. Jacob Thornton was not what she had expected. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and arms thick with muscle. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, and a beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin pants and a simple shirt, and his eyes, a striking blue-gray, watched her with a mix of surprise and wariness. He looked wild, like something that belonged to the mountains themselves. "Miss Bennett?" His voice was deep and rough, as if he did not use it often. "Yes," Eliza managed. "I received your letter." He stared at her for a long moment, and she could not read his expression. Then he stepped forward, moving with a grace surprising for such a large man. "You came all this way alone?" "I had to see where Samuel is buried." Something shifted in his eyes, a softening. "You should not have come alone. These mountains are not safe." "I had no one to come with me." He was quiet, studying her. Then he nodded once. "You must be tired. Come inside. I will tend to your horse." The cabin was simple but well built. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a fire crackling warmly. There was a table, 2 chairs, a bed in the corner, and shelves lined with supplies. Furs hung on the walls, and the smell of wood smoke and something cooking filled the air. It was clean and orderly, not what she had imagined a mountain man's home would be. Jacob returned a few minutes later. "Your horse is fed and watered. She's a good mare, carried you a long way." "Thank you." Eliza stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. "I do not mean to impose. If you can just show me where Samuel is buried, I will not take up more of your time. It is too late in the day to go up there now. The trail is difficult and you are exhausted. You will stay here tonight, and I will take you in the morning." "I cannot ask you to—" "You are not asking? I am telling you." His tone was firm but not unkind. "You have been traveling for weeks. You need rest and a proper meal." Eliza wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. She was exhausted, sore, and hungry. She nodded. "Thank you." He gestured to the table. "Sit. I have stew." The stew was simple but delicious. Venison, potatoes, carrots, and herbs she could not name. Eliza ate gratefully, aware of Jacob watching her from across the table. He ate silently, his movements economical and precise. "How long did it take you to get here?" he asked finally. 2 months. I left Philadelphia in March." His eyes widened slightly. 2 months, across the country, alone. I joined a wagon train from Kansas City to Denver. Then I came up here by myself." He shook his head slowly. "You are either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both." A hint of a smile touched his lips, barely visible beneath his beard. "Your brother spoke of you often. He said you were stubborn." Eliza felt a lump form in her throat. "Tell me about him, please. Tell me what happened." Jacob set down his spoon. His expression grew distant. "I met Samuel about a year ago. He had a claim farther up the mountain, was trying to find silver. He was not much of a miner, but he was a hard worker. We became friends of a sort. I do not have many friends up here." "When did he die?" "January. There was a storm, one of the worst I have seen. I tried to reach his cabin, but the snow was too deep. By the time I got there, 3 days later, he was already gone. Fever, I think. He was delirious, but he knew me. He asked me to write to you, to tell you he was sorry." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "I wish I had come sooner." "He did not want you to come? He said the mountains were no place for you, that you belonged in the city." He was wrong. The words came out sharper than she intended. "I had nothing in Philadelphia. No family, no real home. Just work and loneliness." Jacob looked at her for a long moment. "You have more courage than he gave you credit for." They sat in silence for a while. Then Jacob stood. "You can have the bed. I will sleep by the fire. I cannot take your bed. You can and you will. I have slept on worse." Eliza was too tired to argue further. She lay down on the bed, still fully clothed, and pulled a blanket over herself. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Jacob settling onto the floor by the fire, his broad back to her, the flickering light casting shadows across the cabin walls. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Morning light streamed through the cabin's single window, and Jacob was already up, moving quietly around the small space. Eliza sat up, feeling every ache and pain from her journey. "Good morning," she said, her voice rough with sleep. He glanced at her. "Morning. There's coffee. We will leave after you eat." Breakfast was quick and filling. Then Jacob packed a small bag with supplies and led her outside. The morning was crisp and clear, the sky a brilliant blue. He saddled both horses with practiced efficiency, then helped Eliza mount Rosie. His hands were strong and steady, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest at his touch. They rode higher into the mountains, following a trail that was barely visible. Jacob moved ahead, guiding his horse with ease through the rocky terrain. Eliza followed, trusting him completely. The forest here was thick, and the ground was still patchy with snow in the shaded areas. After about an hour, they emerged into a small meadow. Wildflowers were just beginning to bloom, splashes of color against the green grass, and there, beneath a tall pine tree, was a simple wooden cross. Eliza dismounted and walked slowly toward it. Her legs felt weak. Jacob stayed back, giving her space. The cross was well made, the wood sanded smooth. Samuel's name was carved into it, along with the dates of his birth and death. Eliza knelt in the grass, tears streaming down her face. "He loved this spot," Jacob said quietly from behind her. "He used to come here in the evenings to watch the sunset over the peaks. I thought it was the right place." "It is beautiful," Eliza whispered. "Thank you for this, for taking care of him." I only wish I'd gotten there sooner." They stayed in the meadow for a long time. Eliza talked to Samuel, telling him about her journey, about Philadelphia, about how much she missed him. Jacob stood a respectful distance away, his presence solid and comforting. Finally, Eliza rose. She placed her hand on the cross one last time, then turned to Jacob. "Thank you for bringing me here," he nodded. "What will you do now? Go back to Denver?" "I suppose so. There's nothing for me here." Something flickered across his face, but he said nothing. They rode back to the cabin in silence, and Eliza felt a strange heaviness in her chest. She had come all this way, and now it was over. She would return to Denver, book passage back east, and resume her lonely life. The thought was unbearable. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Jacob spoke. "You could stay a few more days, rest before you make the journey back." Eliza looked at him in surprise. "I have already imposed too much." "It is not an imposition." He stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. "The truth is, I have not had company in a long time. It is nice to have someone to talk to. You must think me very foolish coming all this way." He turned to look at her, his blue-gray eyes intense. "No, I think you are remarkable. Your brother was right to be proud of you." Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. "I will stay a few more days, if you are certain." "I am certain." The days that followed were some of the most peaceful Eliza had ever known. She helped Jacob with small tasks around the cabin, learning how to cure meat, how to identify edible plants, how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds. He taught her to shoot a rifle, standing behind her to guide her aim, his presence both steadying and unsettling. She found herself acutely aware of him, of the way he moved, the rare sound of his laughter, the gentleness in his rough hands. Jacob, for his part, seemed to soften in her presence. He talked more, telling her stories of the mountains, of the animals he had encountered, of the seasons and their rhythms. He asked her about Philadelphia, about her life there, and listened intently to her answers. She realized he was lonely, perhaps even more than she had been. One evening, as they sat outside watching the stars emerge, Eliza found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Why do you live up here alone? Did you never want a family, a wife?" Jacob was silent for a long time. "I had a wife once, back in Missouri. She died of cholera along with our infant son. I came west to forget, to lose myself in the mountains. That was 10 years ago." "I'm so sorry." "It was a long time ago." His voice was rough. "I thought I wanted to be alone, but lately I'm not so sure." Eliza's heart beat faster. What changed? He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "You did." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza did not know what to say. She felt drawn to this man, this wild, strong, gentle man who had cared for her brother, and who now looked at her as if she were something precious. "Eliza," he said, her name rough on his tongue, "I know you have only been here a short time. I know you have a life back east. But I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "When I got your letter saying you were coming, I thought about riding out to Denver to meet you, to spare you the journey up here. But I did not, because I thought you would not want to see me. I thought you would just want information and then to leave. But now that you are here, now that I have spent these days with you, I realize I was a fool. I should have ridden out for you. I should have been there to help you from the start." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "Jacob, let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I know this is sudden. I know I have no right to ask, but I want you to stay. Not for a few more days. I want you to stay here, with me. I want to build a life with you, if you will have me." Eliza stared at him, her mind reeling. She had known him for less than a week, and yet she felt more connected to him than she had to anyone in her life. The thought of leaving, of returning to Philadelphia, filled her with dread. But staying here, in these wild mountains with this wild man, was terrifying in a different way. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Say you will think about it. That is all I ask." She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. That night, Eliza lay awake in Jacob's bed, her mind spinning. She thought about the journey she had made, 2 months of hardship and determination. She thought about Samuel, buried in his meadow beneath the pine tree. She thought about Jacob, his strength and his sadness, the way he looked at her as if she were the answer to a question he had not known how to ask. By morning, she had made her decision. She found Jacob outside, splitting wood for the fire. He looked up as she approached, his expression wary and hopeful. "I will stay," Eliza said simply. The axe slipped from his hands. "You will?" "Yes, I will stay. But I need you to understand something. I do not know how to live like this. I'm a city girl. I will make mistakes. I will need your help." Jacob crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He cupped her face in his large, calloused hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "I will teach you everything. We will learn together." Then he kissed her, and Eliza felt as if she were falling and flying at the same time. His lips were warm and firm, his beard rough against her skin. She melted into him, into his strength, and for the first time in months, she felt truly safe. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I will take care of you, Eliza. I swear it." "And I will take care of you," she replied. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Eliza threw herself into learning the ways of the mountains. Jacob was a patient teacher, showing her how to fish in the cold streams, how to set traps, how to preserve food for the winter. She learned to read the tracks of animals in the dirt, to listen to the sounds of the forest and understand their meanings. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned, her muscles strengthened. She became someone new, someone she had not known she could be. But it was not just about survival skills. It was about building a life together. Jacob proved to be thoughtful and considerate, always aware of her comfort and safety. He brought her wildflowers, carved her a rocking chair for the porch, and spent evenings reading to her from the few books he owned. She, in turn, brought softness to his rough life. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted a small garden, and filled the cabin with her laughter. They talked for hours, sharing their pasts, their fears, their dreams. Eliza told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about the death of her parents, about the loneliness that had haunted her. Jacob told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his lost family, about the years of isolation that had both healed and hardened him. "I never thought I would feel this way again," he admitted one night as they lay in bed, her head on his chest, his arms around her. "I thought that part of me was dead." "I never thought I would feel this way at all," Eliza replied. "I thought love was something that happened to other people." "Do you love me?" His voice was rough with hope and fear. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I love you, Jacob Thornton." He tightened his arms around her. "And I love you, Eliza Bennett, more than I thought possible." In June, they rode down to Denver. Eliza needed supplies, and Jacob needed to sell his furs. But they also had another purpose. They found a minister and were married in a simple ceremony with the hotel owner and his wife as witnesses. Eliza wore a simple blue dress she had bought in town, and Jacob had trimmed his beard and wore a clean shirt. They exchanged vows in quiet voices, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed her with such tenderness that Eliza felt tears slide down her cheeks. "Mrs. Thornton," Jacob murmured against her lips. "Mr. Thornton," she replied, smiling. They spent one night in the hotel, a rare luxury. Jacob was gentle with her, his touch reverent, and Eliza discovered depths of passion she had not known existed. In his arms, she felt cherished and desired, and she understood finally what it meant to be truly loved. The next day, they rode back to the mountains, back to their cabin, back to their life. Eliza felt no regret, no longing for the world she had left behind. This was where she belonged. Summer in the mountains was glorious. The meadows bloomed with wildflowers, and the air was filled with the songs of birds. Eliza's garden flourished, and she learned to make bread in the Dutch oven, to churn butter, to preserve berries. Jacob hunted and fished, always bringing home enough to keep them well fed. They worked side by side, building a small chicken coop, repairing the cabin's roof, and preparing for the winter they knew would be harsh. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch Jacob had built, watching the sun set over the peaks. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. Eliza would rest her head on Jacob's broad shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart and marvel at how much her life had changed. One day in August, as Eliza was working in the garden, she felt a wave of dizziness. She sat down quickly, her hand on her stomach. Jacob, who had been repairing a fence nearby, was at her side in an instant. "What is wrong? Are you ill?" Eliza looked up at him, her mind racing. She had not had her monthly courses in 2 months. She had been too busy to notice, but now, with the dizziness and the tenderness in her breasts, she understood. "I think I might be with child," she said softly. Jacob's eyes went wide. He knelt beside her, his hands gentle on her arms. "Truly? I think so. I'm not certain, but the signs are there." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it. "A child. Our child." "Are you happy?" Eliza asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy? Eliza, I'm overjoyed." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "You have given me so much already, and now this. I do not deserve you." "Yes, you do," she whispered. "We deserve each other." The pregnancy was not easy. Morning sickness plagued Eliza through the fall, and Jacob hovered over her constantly, worried and protective. He took over most of the heavy chores, insisting she rest. Eliza, unused to being idle, chafed at the restrictions, but secretly enjoyed his attentiveness. As winter approached, they prepared carefully. The cabin was stocked with food, firewood, and supplies. Jacob made sure they had everything they would need for the baby: soft blankets, tiny clothes that Eliza sewed, a cradle he carved from pine. They talked about names, about the future, about the family they were building. The first snow fell in November, a light dusting that turned the world white and silent. Eliza stood at the window, her hand on her swelling belly, and felt a deep sense of peace. A year ago, she had been alone in Philadelphia, mourning her brother and facing a bleak future. Now she was here, in these wild mountains, married to a man she loved beyond measure, carrying his child. "What are you thinking?" Jacob asked, coming to stand behind her. He wrapped his arms around her, his hands covering hers on her belly. "I am thinking about how much has changed, how I traveled 2 months to reach this mountain, to find you. I wish I had ridden out to meet you. I would have saved you the hardship of that journey." Eliza turned in his arms, looking up at him. "But then I would not have proven to myself that I could do it. I needed that journey, Jacob. It made me strong enough to be here, to be your wife, to be a mother." He kissed her forehead. "You have always been strong. I just helped you see it." Winter settled in with a vengeance. The snow piled high around the cabin, and the wind howled through the trees. But inside, they were warm and safe. Jacob kept the fire burning, and they spent long evenings reading, talking, and planning. Eliza knitted tiny hats and socks, and Jacob whittled toys for the baby who would arrive in spring. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly. Jacob had shot a turkey, and Eliza roasted it with wild onions and herbs. They exchanged simple gifts. Eliza gave Jacob a new shirt she had sewn, and he gave her a necklace he had carved from bone, a small heart that hung on a leather cord. "It is beautiful," she said, tears in her eyes. "Not as beautiful as you." He fastened it around her neck, then kissed her gently. The new year of 1879 arrived with a blizzard. For 3 days the snow fell without stopping, and the wind screamed around the cabin. Jacob kept the fire high and the doors barred, and they waited it out together. Eliza felt the baby move inside her, strong kicks that made her gasp and laugh. Jacob would place his large hand on her belly, his face filled with wonder, and she would see the fear and hope warring in his eyes. "What if I am not a good father?" he asked one night. "You will be a wonderful father. You are already taking care of us." "But what if something goes wrong? What if I lose you like I lost them?" Eliza took his face in her hands. "You will not lose me. I am strong, and I have you. We will be fine." He kissed her fiercely, desperately, and she held him tight, offering what comfort she could. The baby came in April, during a warm spell that melted the snow and brought the first green shoots pushing through the earth. Eliza's labor began in the early morning, and Jacob, who had been prepared and nervous for weeks, sprang into action. He had ridden down to the nearest settlement in March to fetch a midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Harriet, who had agreed to stay with them until the baby came. Mrs. Harriet took charge immediately, ordering Jacob to boil water and fetch clean linens. He obeyed, his face pale but determined. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Eliza had never known such pain, but she gritted her teeth and bore it, focusing on Jacob's face whenever the contractions allowed her to breathe. "You are doing so well," he told her, his voice rough with emotion, "just a little longer." Finally, as the moon rose over the mountains, the baby was born. A boy, healthy and loud with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue-gray eyes. Mrs. Harriet cleaned him and placed him in Eliza's arms, and she looked down at her son in awe. "Jacob, look, he is perfect." Jacob knelt beside the bed, his eyes filled with tears. He touched the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers curled around his father's large finger. "He is so small. He will grow big and strong, like you." They named him Samuel Jacob Thornton, after Eliza's brother and his father. Jacob held his son for hours that first night, pacing the cabin, talking to him in a low voice, making promises. Eliza watched them, exhausted but happy, and knew she had made the right choice in staying. The months that followed were a whirlwind of feedings and diaper changes, sleepless nights and moments of pure joy. Samuel was a healthy baby, growing quickly, his personality emerging. He had his father's stubbornness and his mother's curiosity. Jacob proved to be a devoted father, patient and gentle despite his size and rough exterior. He would cradle Samuel in his arms, singing old songs in a surprisingly pleasant voice, and Eliza would feel her heart swell with love. By summer, Eliza had regained her strength, and they fell into a rhythm. She cared for Samuel in the garden, while Jacob hunted and maintained the cabin. They were a family, complete and whole, and the mountain felt like home. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Samuel asleep in his cradle nearby, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought her here. "Do you ever think about what our lives would be like if I had not come to find you?" Jacob was quiet for a moment. "I think about it often. I would still be alone, slowly turning to stone. You saved me, Eliza. And you saved me. We saved each other." He took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "I meant what I said before. I wish I had ridden out to meet you, to spare you that journey. But I needed to make that journey. I needed to find my own strength, and I needed to find you. Still, 2 months. You traveled for 2 months, across the country, through danger and hardship. That is love, Eliza. That is the kind of love I want to give you every day for the rest of our lives." She leaned against him, feeling the solid strength of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "And you do, every day, in 100 small ways. You give me everything." The years passed in a pattern of seasons. Winters brought snow and isolation, springs brought new life, summers were filled with work and laughter, and autumns prepared them for the cold months ahead. Samuel grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who loved the mountains as much as his parents. He learned to ride at 3, to fish at 4, and to shoot at 6. Jacob taught him to respect the wilderness, to move quietly and observe, to take only what was needed. When Samuel was 3, Eliza gave birth to a daughter they named Emma. She had her mother's dark hair and determined spirit, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her father and brother everywhere. Jacob adored her, calling her his little wildflower, and she would climb into his lap and demand stories of bears and eagles. 2 years later, another son arrived, Thomas, a quiet, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Eliza taught him to read by the fire, and he would spend hours poring over the few volumes they owned, asking endless questions about the world beyond the mountains. The cabin grew too small, so Jacob built an addition, creating more rooms for the growing family. He also built a larger barn and expanded the garden. They acquired more animals, goats for milk, pigs for meat, and a cow. The homestead became a thriving operation, and though they were isolated, they were never lonely. Every year they made the journey down to Denver for supplies and to visit Samuel's grave. The children would place wildflowers on their uncle's cross, and Eliza would tell them stories about the brother they had never met, the man whose death had brought her to this mountain and to their father. "Uncle Samuel would have loved you," she told them. "He would have been so proud." On Samuel's 10th birthday, Jacob took him on his first overnight hunting trip. They returned 2 days later, Samuel bursting with pride over the deer he had helped bring down. Emma, not to be outdone, demanded her own trip, and Jacob obliged, taking her fishing. She caught the biggest trout of the season and refused to let anyone forget it. Thomas, less interested in hunting and fishing, preferred to help his mother with the garden and the animals. He had a gentle touch with the creatures, and Eliza saw in him a future as a healer or a teacher. Whatever he chose, she knew he would be kind and thoughtful. As the children grew, so did the love between Eliza and Jacob. They had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, faced hardships and joys, and emerged stronger. Jacob remained protective and devoted, and Eliza remained his anchor, the one who kept him tethered to the world. They still sat on the porch most evenings, hands clasped, watching the mountains change color in the fading light. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked one night, "giving up the city for this life?" "Never," Eliza said firmly. "This is where I belong. With you, with our children, in these mountains. This is home. I still think I should have ridden out for you." She laughed. "Jacob Thornton, you've been saying that for 14 years. Let it go." "I cannot. You made such a sacrifice, traveling all that way." "It was not a sacrifice. It was the best decision I ever made." She turned to look at him, seeing the lines time had etched around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair. He was still strong, still capable, but they were both growing older. "Besides, if you had ridden out, I might not have understood how much I needed this place. The journey changed me, made me ready for this life. You are a remarkable woman, Eliza Thornton. And you are a remarkable man." In the spring of 1893, when Samuel was 14, Emma 11, and Thomas 9, tragedy struck. A late snowstorm caught Jacob and Samuel while they were checking traps on the far side of the mountain. They took shelter in a cave, but Jacob developed a severe cough that turned into pneumonia. By the time Samuel got him back to the cabin, Jacob was burning with fever. Eliza nursed him desperately, using every remedy she knew. She made teas from herbs, kept him warm, and prayed harder than she had ever prayed. The children hovered nearby, frightened by their father's weakness. For 3 days, Jacob drifted in and out of consciousness, and Eliza feared she would lose him. But on the 4th day, the fever broke. Jacob opened his eyes and saw Eliza sitting beside him, her face haggard with exhaustion and worry. "I am not going anywhere," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I made you a promise, remember, to take care of you. I am not breaking that promise." Eliza burst into tears, clutching his hand. "Do not scare me like that again." "I will do my best." He recovered slowly, regaining his strength over the following weeks. The illness had shaken them both, a reminder of their mortality. That summer, they made a decision. They would teach the children everything they could, so that if something happened to either parent, the family could survive. Samuel, already skilled in hunting and trapping, learned more about the business side, how to trade with merchants in Denver, how to manage their resources. Emma, fierce and independent, learned to handle the heavier chores, to chop wood and repair buildings. Thomas, with his gentle nature, became the family's medic, learning which plants healed and which harmed. But beyond the practical skills, they taught their children about love, about sacrifice and commitment, about the importance of family, about choosing each other every day. "Your mother traveled 2 months to reach this mountain," Jacob told them one evening. "She crossed the country alone, through danger and hardship, because she needed to say goodbye to her brother. But what she found was a new beginning. She found me, and we found this life together." "And I would do it again," Eliza added, 1,000 times over, "because this life, with all of you, is worth every hardship I endured." The children listened, seeing the love in their parents' eyes, understanding in a way only those who have witnessed true devotion can. As the years continued to pass, the Thornton family became known throughout the region. Trappers and miners passing through would stop at their homestead, welcomed with a hot meal and a place to sleep. Jacob's reputation as a fair and honest man spread, and Eliza's kindness became legendary. The children grew into capable young adults, each carving their own path but always tied to the mountain and to each other. Samuel, at 18, took a wife, a strong young woman named Mary who had come west with her family. They built a cabin nearby, and Samuel continued the trapping business his father had taught him. Emma, at 15, was courted by a young rancher from the valley below, but she refused him, saying she was not ready to leave the mountain. Thomas, at 13, announced his intention to become a doctor, and Eliza and Jacob began saving money to send him to school in Denver. In the summer of 1897, Eliza and Jacob celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary. They rode up to the meadow where Samuel Bennett was buried, something they did less frequently now but still treasured. The meadow was as beautiful as ever, the wildflowers in full bloom, the mountains rising majestically around them. Eliza stood before her brother's cross, now weathered and worn, and spoke to him as she had so many times before. "Thank you, Samuel. Thank you for bringing me here, for leading me to Jacob. I hope you are at peace. I hope you know how happy I am." Jacob stood beside her, his arm around her waist. "He knows." They stayed for a while, then rode back to the cabin. That evening, surrounded by their children and Samuel's wife, they shared a special meal. Emma had baked a cake, Thomas had picked wildflowers for the table, and Samuel had brought venison he had hunted himself. After dinner, Jacob stood and cleared his throat. The family fell silent, looking at him expectantly. "I want to say something," he began, his voice steady but emotional. 19 years ago, I was a man alone, hardened by loss and isolation. I thought I wanted solitude. I thought the mountains were enough. But then Eliza came. She traveled 2 months across the entire country to reach this mountain. She came to say goodbye to her brother, but she gave me a new beginning. He looked at Eliza, his eyes shining. "I have said before that I wish I had ridden out to meet you, to spare you that journey. And I still mean it. But I also understand now that your journey was important. It brought you here as the woman you needed to be, strong and brave and determined. It showed me the measure of your courage, and it gave us this story, this incredible story of love and perseverance that I hope our children will tell their children." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "Jacob, I am not finished," he smiled. "You gave me everything, Eliza, a home, a family, a reason to live. You made this mountain, which was once a place of isolation, into a place of love. And I want you to know that every day I wake up grateful that you made that journey. Every day I thank God that you are mine." The children applauded, and Emma wiped tears from her eyes. Samuel raised his glass. "To Mother and Father, the strongest people I know." "To Mother and Father," the others echoed. Eliza stood and went to Jacob, wrapping her arms around him. "I love you," she whispered. "I will always love you. And I love you. Forever." They held each other, surrounded by the family they had built, in the home they had created, on the mountain that had become their sanctuary. As the years turned into decades, the Thornton family continued to thrive. Thomas went to medical school and returned to the mountains to serve the scattered communities, becoming a beloved doctor. Emma eventually married a schoolteacher who was willing to live on the mountain, and they built a school for the children of trappers and miners. Samuel's trapping business grew, and he and Mary had 5 children who filled the mountain with laughter. Jacob and Eliza grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They still sat on the porch most evenings, still held hands, still marveled at the beauty of the mountains and the life they had built. Their hair turned silver, their faces lined with wrinkles earned through laughter and hardship, but their eyes still lit up when they looked at each other. In the spring of 1910, on a warm afternoon, Jacob passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 68 years old. Eliza held his hand as he drew his last breath, and though her heart shattered, she was grateful he had gone peacefully, without pain. The family buried him in the meadow, next to Samuel Bennett. Eliza chose the spot herself, saying that the 2 men who had meant the most to her should rest side by side, watching over the mountains they had loved. "You said you would have ridden out for me," she whispered as she stood before his grave. "But you gave me something better. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me love. Thank you, my darling. Thank you for everything." Eliza lived another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She told them stories of Philadelphia, of her journey west, of the early days with Jacob on the mountain. She taught the grandchildren to garden, to sew, to find beauty in simple things. And she spoke often of love, of the kind of love that endures, that builds, that transforms. In the summer of 1918, at the age of 63, Eliza passed away. The family gathered from across the region to say goodbye. They buried her next to Jacob, and on her headstone, Thomas carved the words she had spoken so often. She traveled 2 months to reach his mountain, and he would have ridden out for her. Together, they built a life of love. The homestead remained in the Thornton family for generations. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren walked the trails Jacob had carved, tended the garden Eliza had planted, and sat on the porch watching the sunsets. The cabin was expanded and modernized over time, but the heart of it remained the same, a testament to the love that had built it. The story of Jacob and Eliza became family legend, told and retold around fires and dinner tables. The great journey Eliza had made, the courage she had shown, the love they had shared, all of it passed down through the years. And always, the lesson remained clear. Love is worth any journey, any hardship, any sacrifice. The meadow where Jacob, Eliza, and Samuel rested became a family gathering place. On anniversaries and birthdays, on holidays and special occasions, the Thorntons would hike up to the meadow, bringing flowers and stories. They would sit among the wildflowers and remember the man who had been a brother, the man who had been a husband and father, and the woman who had brought them all together. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right through the pine trees, it sounded like laughter, like the echo of a love so strong it could never truly die, a love that lived on in every generation, in every child who carried their blood, in every person who heard their story and believed that true love was possible. Because Eliza had traveled 2 months to reach his mountain, and Jacob would have ridden out for her. But in the end, they had met exactly where and when they were meant to meet, and they had built something eternal. Not just a family or a homestead, but a legacy of love that would endure as long as the mountains themselves stood tall against the sky, unchanging and everlasting, a monument to what two hearts could create when they found each other in the wilderness and chose to never let go. The seasons continued their endless cycle on Thornton Peak. Snow fell and melted, wildflowers bloomed and faded, and the mountains stood silent, witness to the passage of time. But the love story of Jacob and Eliza Thornton remained alive, a beacon for anyone who doubted the power of courage, the strength of commitment, and the enduring nature of true love. Their journey had begun with loss and loneliness, with a letter that brought news of death and sorrow. But it had transformed into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the transformative power of love. Eliza had made the journey not knowing what she would find, driven only by grief and duty. But she had found everything she had never known she needed: a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that transcended all obstacles. And Jacob, the mountain man who had isolated himself from the world, had been brought back to life by a woman who refused to give up, who traveled across a continent to honor her brother's memory. He had learned that strength was not found in solitude, but in connection, that true courage was allowing yourself to love again after loss, that home was not a place but a person. Together, they had proven that sometimes the longest journeys lead us exactly where we need to be, that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, and that two broken hearts can heal each other if they are willing to take the risk. Their story was one of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, of simple choices that led to profound consequences, of love that grew quietly but powerfully in the shadow of the mountains. And so the legacy continued, passed from generation to generation, a reminder that love is always worth the journey, no matter how long or difficult it may be. Because in the end, Eliza had traveled 2 months to reach Jacob's mountain, and he would have ridden out for her. But they had found each other exactly when and where they were meant to, and that made all the difference. Their love story was complete, their ending happy and closed, their life together a testament to everything that matters most in this world: family, devotion, sacrifice, and a love that lasts forever, as enduring and majestic as the mountains themselves.